Let's head out to Texas, kind of preview it all with our good friend, Chris Hummer, national college football writer for 247sports.com. Now, Chris, you're there in Austin. Are you an Astros guy or a Rangers guy? How does that work? Or maybe you're a fan of another team.
I'm a Rangers guy. Astros fans this time of year have been pretty obnoxious, so I've had to kind of deal with that. But the Astros are an excellent baseball team for sure.
Now, who will you pull for today? Will you pull for the home state club, or will your haterism kind of lead you to the Rays corner here?
Oh, I'm a pretty big Rays fan today, I have to say.
Okay, so the hater, the haterade.
Yeah, it's definitely a hater. I usually root for in-state teams, but I'm gonna have to make an exception for the Astros.
Yeah, he's got that 32-ounce Yeti cup full of that haterade. Chris Hummer does as he gets ready for that game later today.
Special edition haterade for sure, with some Astros love mixed in.
Yeah, special mix Astroberry haterade. Let's talk some college football, Chris. It's a huge Saturday, man, around college football, but you guys have it made out there in Texas with these two games. I know you'll be in Dallas for, I guess, what we refer to now as the Red River Rivalry. We're no longer allowed to call it the Shootout. Is that correct?
Yeah, they rebranded it a couple years ago to the Showdown, which just is not as fun as the Shootout. So I prefer to go with the tongue twister version of the Red River Rivalry for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of like the world's largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville for Florida, Georgia. We're not allowed to say that. We're not allowed to refer to that in official capacity anymore. Anyway, but let's talk about it. I said it earlier in the show. It's like we got a gunslinger Saturday out there in the Lone Star State. Although, I guess you could say with Sam Ehlinger and Jalen Hurts, that matchup could come down to their legs as much as their right arms.
Yeah, and I think with both quarterbacks, I think both are excellent passers. I don't want to dismiss those qualities, but I think what transforms Jalen and Sam from very good to potentially special on the college level is their ability to hurt defenses with their legs. I think they're two different runners. Sam's not exactly what I would call quick. Well, quick is probably a better word to describe Sam than fast. Sam is subtle in his movements, and he's got kind of like a herky-jerky running style that always seems to kind of twist defenders up. He always falls forward. He's a thick guy on the lower half of his body, gets the extra yards. Jalen's similar in that regard. He's a big framed dude who can run people over, but Jalen's probably a little quicker and probably a little bit of a better overall runner than Sam. But either way, their legs are going to be huge in this game. But I would say both secondaries have some major questions, so I think both are going to put up some pretty good yardage through the air as well.
Chris, it just seems like time after time in matchups like this, Sam Ehlinger, for all of his accomplishments, for all of his statistical production, he's sort of the other guy again. Now, maybe not so much out there in the state of Texas, but I think around the country when people think about OU and Texas this weekend and that matchup at quarterback, Jalen Hurts maybe comes to mind first. Is it because Jalen's just such a great story and kind of the path that he took and the what we saw from him a year ago at Alabama, especially in that SEC championship game? And how dangerous do you think Sam Ehlinger is in those type of situations? He seems to thrive on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sam is a top 5 quarterback in the country, maybe a top 6, however you want to kind of cut up your tiers. And he's been really dangerous in those big game situations. He beat Kyler Murray in this game a season ago, head-to-head in the Red River Rivalry, and he had an excellent game that day, Sam did. Sam beat Jake Fromm head-to-head in the Sugar Bowl. And he played Will Grier really, really well in a kind of an upset loss for Texas and Austin last year. And every time Sam's gone up against another high-profile passer, he's played exceptionally. JT Daniels was a 5-star true freshman coming into Austin last year, and Sam outplayed him by a pretty big margin. And Sam played pretty well the year before in Los Angeles when Sam Darnold was USC's quarterback, and Sam had to play his first ever road start in Los Angeles at the Coliseum. So Sam's had a pretty big history of stepping up when the lights are the brightest. And I have no doubt he'll again be really good on Saturday.
What about Jalen's comments in regards to having played in big or bigger games than even this one in the past? Obviously, speaking to his time at Alabama, matchups with Auburn, he's played in college football playoff national championship games, SEC championship games. Made a little bit of a stir, made a little bit of a ripple. How did that kind of sell there in the state of Texas specifically?
I mean, teams are going to do what they do, right? They're going to find motivation in whatever they can. In this situation, players in Austin heard that comment and then decided to take a little bit from that and kind of help themselves with a little extra motivation. But I honestly didn't think it was that big of a deal. He's right. Like, the Red River Rivalry is in a really intense atmosphere. I'd say it's among probably the 5 most interesting in college football. And certainly if you've never kind of run through that tunnel or had to run to the opposite side of the field where the Texas fans sit, it's going to be completely different than anything you've ever really experienced because it's just a really unique environment overall. But playing in the Iron Bowl, playing in the SEC championship, playing in a national championship prepares you for a game like this. To expect Jalen to be intimidated by this kind of environment would be I think, the wrong way to look at it, because he's already one of the calmest, kind of most even personalities that we've seen in this sport in a long time. To kind of expect him to have it be in his home state and all of a sudden be intimidated by 45,000 fans in burnt orange would be a surprise.
There's a narrative going into this weekend that it's kind of a validation Saturday for some teams. I think Oklahoma qualifies with that in terms of its first big test of the season. What about Alabama and Texas A&M? Do you think A&M and the trip to College Station for Alabama will offer a legitimate representation more so of this Alabama team than what we've seen today?
Oh, yeah, unquestionably. Texas A&M is by far the best team Alabama has played so far this season. I don't think it's close. I know people are looking at the 2 losses for the Aggies and kind of dismissing that program offhand. But you could really make a legitimate argument since Texas A&M came into the SEC West to that program, outside of one really bad blowout loss in, I believe, 2014, has played Alabama closer than anyone, including LSU. And that includes a season ago where A&M gave Alabama its toughest test during the regular season prior to the SEC championship meeting with Georgia. So in that regard, yeah, I think going to this road environment in College Station, which I think College Station got quite a bit of hate this week about not necessarily living up to its its reputation as a really tough place to play. But that place was extremely difficult to play. Like, that place was loud with the fans right on top of you. The place can sway, like legitimately sway in the press box. And Alabama won that game by, I believe, a possession 2 years ago when they made that trip for a night game. So, yeah, I think you're going to learn a lot, especially defensively, where the Crimson Tide have already struggled a little bit. Kellen Mond hasn't had a great year. But that offense, especially those receivers, are capable of testing Alabama's defense for sure.
Yeah, I've never been the biggest proponent of Kellen Mond. That's well documented. But even I have to admit, when you look at what A&M lost and Travion Williams, 1,700, nearly 1,800 rushing yards a year ago to lead the SEC, 18 rushing touchdowns. Jay Sternberger at tight end, and then Eric McCoy on that offensive line. Just seems like Chris, A&M just hasn't had answers at those respective spots, even with those wide receivers that you outlined that have plenty of game experience. When you talk about Osborne and Rogers and Davis and even Buckley, is it safe to say that's what's missing right now from A&M, or is it more even on the defensive side of the ball where Terrell Dodson left, Terrell Alaka left? It seems like they've had a hard time backfilling for some of those critical spots this year.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's especially true along the offensive front. A&M's offensive line in the past has really been a strength, but I would say this year they've had a really hard time putting 5 people on the field consistently who are playing well. You saw that against Arkansas. Arkansas really actually won that game up front along the line of scrimmage against A&M's offensive line. and that's been an issue. And A&M has yet to kind of find a lead back. Their projected starter is out for the season, and they've been rotating freshmen, neither one of whom has really kind of broken out to this point. I think that's the inability to kind of set up Kellen Mond through the run game has, I think, put a little more strain on him and exposed some of his flaws as a passer in some ways. I would point to that as the main culprit for A&M's issues right now. But it's still a team with a ton of talent. But when you're averaging, I think they're averaging just a tick under 4.5 yards per carry, which is kind of around 70th nationally. That's not going to get it down in the SEC where you have to run the ball. And I do think that's been A&M's biggest issue, not necessarily Kellen Mond, but it definitely contributes to Mond's struggles.
14 carries, a season high for Kellen Mond against Arkansas 2 weeks ago in Arlington. Do you see a similar output for him in the run game because of some of the things you just outlined for us there, the struggles that A&M has had? And I just think it's got to be that kind of game for Kellen Mond all around. He's not just going to win this game with his arm and those receivers. I think he's going to have – he had 98 rushing yards against Alabama last year. We saw John Rice Plumlee, the Ole Miss true freshman, go for over 100 from the quarterback position the last time out for the Crimson Tide. I think it's got to be that kind of game with his feet too. Do you?
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's actually one I talk to people around College Station that they question. Jimbo does not let, maybe does not let, that's probably the wrong word, but Jimbo does not design a lot of plays to take advantage of Kellen's mobility. But I think you saw last year when Texas A&M went up against the better teams in the SEC, Kellen did run. He ran 18 times against Alabama last year, 16 times against Kentucky in that defense, 18 times against Auburn, 20 times against LSU, and obviously that includes a lot of extra football there. But when A&M's had to kind of go up against more difficult defenses, Kellen's opted to run a little bit more, and I think if A&M's going to have any shot this weekend, it's going to have to be a pretty similar game plan, as you said, especially because I know this has been probably a narrative that's burnt out a little bit, but historically, the quarterbacks who can stretch Alabama's defense have been mobile, at least to a degree, and I think Kellen does have that aspect in his game, and it's going to have to be leaned on a little bit for A&M to have a chance.
Does the road run out on the Florida Gators in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Saturday night? You have to be impressed by a tough, gritty performance, if not pretty, from the Florida Gators in that win over Auburn last Saturday, Chris. But to me, it kind of has the feel of inevitability that LSU's going to take care of business Saturday night. But then I think about previous trips that Florida teams have made to Red Stick, and I kind of felt that way a couple 3 years ago when O was trying to solidify his place as the permanent head coach, and everything was set up. Everything was set up for LSU to really dismantle that Florida team, and it didn't happen. What do you see for this one on Saturday night?
I think of the remaining unbeaten teams in the top 10, Florida is by a pretty decent margin the worst team among that group. I would agree. I think there's a reason. I believe the line is almost 2 touchdowns right now in favor of LSU, right? So
right.
There's a reason why odds makers are leaning so heavily towards LSU. I don't trust Florida's secondary. I don't really trust Florida's offense. And I would expect LSU to win this game. I don't necessarily think it'll be a blowout, but I would be very surprised if Florida's unbeaten run doesn't kind of come to a halt here. I just don't think they have enough, especially offensively, to kind of keep up with the firepower LSU's displayed early in the year. And I know Florida's got 2 of the better corners in the country, in Marco Wilson and C.J. Henderson, but the depth at safety is a concern. The depth behind those 2 is a concern. And I think if LSU can mitigate that pass rush, it's going to be a really long day for the Gators.
We've talked about it earlier in the week, and we associate grad transfers so often with quarterbacks, as we should. Just look at the Southeastern Conference right now. We've done this before when you've been on the show with Joe Burrow, with Tommy Stevens, with Nick Starkel at Arkansas, and you go around the league. I mean, you can pretty much have a pick of grad transfers who have impacted the quarterback spot greatly. But, man, I'll tell you, Jonathan Greenard, the outside linebacker, defensive end, hybrid type, coming in from Louisville for the Florida Gators. You talk about a revelation for a team, and Florida typically doesn't need a lot of help from that standpoint, a lot of juice in their front seven. But he's been outstanding, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, I think if you were going to rank, and ranking is kind of weird when you talk about ranking transfers, but if you're going to look at the impact of overall transfers on college football this season, Greenard would have to be in your top 5, and you'd probably have him and 4 other quarterbacks, because that's the position that can make the biggest impact. But yeah, he's been incredible so far. I believe he's averaging over a tackle, or almost 2 tackles per loss per game. He leads the team with 4 sacks, and Jabari Zuminga has been a little banged up earlier this year, and Greenard's kind of taken on that lead pass rusher role. And if it wasn't for Greenard, I don't really know how much pressure Florida would consistently generate. I know they usually have some dudes on the outside, but he's been a revelation, and that was a great job by Dan Mullen and his staff, identifying him pretty early in the transfer process. He fits exactly what Todd Grantham is looking for as kind of that hybrid edge rusher, kind of linebacker, and he's been fantastic. I'm sure Scott Scatterfield still wishes he had Jonathan Greenard playing for Louisville this year in their bull push. He's been great.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe there was a familiarity there with Grantham at Louisville, or in the recruiting process going back to Greenard. They cross paths a little bit, but either way, you're right. It's been critical. It sounds like Zuniga is going to be good to go perhaps this week on that other edge for Florida. And you're right, they're going to need all the pressure they can get against Joe Burrow. Speaking of Joe Burrow, I guess between Dallas, College Station, and Baton Rouge, what are we talking about in terms of distance on Saturday? Maybe 6 hours total, something like that. If we put a radius around it, I'm not that good at that. But so rank me
about 6 hours.
Rank me those quarterbacks in that 6 hour sort of radius there on Saturday. Rank them right now for me: Burrow, Ellinger, Hurts, and Tagovailoa. We'll leave Kyle Trask out of this for now. He's been impressive, but we'll go ahead and assume Kyle is 6th of those 6. Rank those other 5 guys for me right now in your eyes, Chris.
Are you talking about just this season?
Yeah, we can do just this season.
All right. Well, then it'd be Tua. Well, I'd still probably go. It'd be Tua. It'd be Joe Burrow. He's been incredible this year. It would be Sam tied with Jalen for 3. I might even put Sam, Jalen, and Joe on the same.
No ties.
All right, fine. If we're talking about which quarterback I think is best, it goes Tua, Sam, Joe, Jalen, Kellen, and then Kyle Trask, a pretty distant 6th.
All right. We put his feet to the fire there a little bit. Did you see that? Yeah, we enjoy doing that with Chris. Kind of like that Texas brisket, you know. Hey, Chris, safe travels to Dallas. Enjoy the fair. What do you get there? What do you get at the state fair? Is it funnel cake? Is it the corn dogs? What do you prefer there?
I've got a pretty good routine down. I start after the game is over and I've done all my work. I go down and get a corn dog and a beer. I wait like 5 minutes to kind of digest it a little bit, and then I get a fried Twinkie on the way out.
Oh,
fried Snickers. I'm sorry, not a fried Twinkie.
Yeah, I've heard about those. That's almost enough to make me go to one of those Red River rivalry games. That sounds good. Hey, Chris, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, my man.